and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special conversation. As we all know, GTLF's theme this year is Taming the Wild. And I think I've got the best panel session of the entire GTLF. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Shazmin Shamsuddin, and before we start, I just want to preempt you that there might be a bit of colorful language, because after all, we are wild women up here. All right? And the wild woman, she is uninhibited, she's unrestrained, she's bold, and while she doesn't necessarily need to create drama to pay, bring attention to herself, she lives her truth, and she is unafraid of letting people see who she is. And of course, I would like to introduce my panel this afternoon. To my right is Chloe Aridjis. She is the author of 3 novels, Book of Clouds, which won the Prix du Premier Roman Étranger in France. Her second book, Asunder, was published in 2013, and her third book, Sea Monsters, was awarded the 2020 Penn Faulkner Award for fiction. Chloe has written for various art journals and was a guest curator at the Lenora Carrington exhibition at the Tate Liverpool. She's a member of the Writers Rebel, a group of writers who are focused on addressing climate emergency and biodiversity loss. I think she's going to be talking about that tomorrow in one of your sessions, yeah? And her most recent book is Dialogue with a Somnambulist, Stories, Essays, and a Portrait Gallery. And right smack in the center, we've got Dr. Vila Somiah. She is a Sabah anthropologist at the Gender Studies program at University Malay. She is unrestrained, and honestly, she don't give a fuck. So we'll be hearing a lot from her. She, of course, her work focuses on the underrepresented narratives of Bornean women, migrants, and other sexual and gender minorities. She's edited Sabah from the Ground, the 2020 elections, and the politics of survival, and authored Irregular Migrants and the Sea at the Borders of Sabah, Malaysia, Pelagic Alliance. And outside of academia, she writes on and speaks about local social, political landscapes and oppressions. Yeah. All right. Now, next to her in green, I think if you are from Penang, you would recognize her immediately. Regina Ibrahim is a trans woman author. She's a legend, let's face it. Focusing her fiction mostly on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. She has 8 novels under her belt, some published shorts and articles. Mama, as she is fondly known to all of us, in the local arts and literary circles, was a former government teacher and stage performer pursuing the literary world at the tender age of 50. So it's never too late for any of us. Currently, she is training young writers through an online portal. All of her works are in Bahasa Malaysia, and she considers herself a holistic artist. And last but not least is Dina Zaman. A little backstory. She was my senior at Tugu Kursha, but she had left when I entered Form 1. And when I was in Form 1, everyone asked me if I was her sister. You had curly hair back then, didn't you? Big curly hair. Well, that's as far as our connection goes, but I've known Dina a long time. Dina is the author of I Am Muslim, a book of short stories, The King of the Sea, and another nonfiction book, Holy Men, Holy Women, and you're working on your 4th book now, right? And she co-founded think tank Iman Research with friends back in 2015. And Iman focuses on preventing violent extremism and peace building in Malaysia and the region. And she's interested in discussing religion in public life, how faith is political, sociological, and emotional, and how it impacts lives. And that's a big discussion for a country like Malaysia, isn't it? Don't roll your eyes. Okay, well, a big round of applause for our panelists. All right, when you think of wild women, feral females, what comes to mind? I mean, for myself, I feel that these women are in touch with themselves. They know themselves well. They're not afraid to live their truth. They generally, like I said earlier, they don't give a fuck. And we all know those who don't give a fuck generally get more done. And they impact their communities and society in bigger ways than those who perhaps are too consumed with what other people think of them. And I think wild women, feral females, generally have more fun, with or without certain, consequences. So, I guess my first question is, as writers, are wild women more fun to write about? Chloe, go for it.
I think it's a question to answer. Well, I don't know. I think it'd be more of a challenge to write about someone.
Sorry, can you hear her? The microphone. Okay, you need to speak at the top.
My voice doesn't project very well. Well, yes, they're often agents of disruption and change, and often embody what's being suppressed elsewhere in the community or society, and they add an element of unpredictability to any story, and also a life force, and often also embody the natural world or other instincts that are being marginalized. And well, we'll speak more about our own stories, but say, well, I grew up in Mexico, and in Mexican culture, there was certain female figures that into whom many of the other women's drives were channeled, and within a society where a lot was being suppressed.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
I mean, are wild women great to write about?
Yeah.
As a wild woman myself, I think as I'm a wild queen, is that I think I want to unpack this term wild. I kind of want to problematize it. Who are we wild to, and why are we termed, or why are these characters deemed wild? I think is the big question. I write about women who have to get shit done. And I write about women who have to get shit done under pressure. And for some odd reason, there is a huge obsession with the female under duress, right? The female form under duress, because that's reality. I don't know a single woman here who's never been under duress. And thank you.
Can we have a show of hands for any woman under duress at the moment in this hall? Okay, all right, good.
Thank you very much. Free drinks downstairs. No, but the thing is, the obsession isn't an obsession, and it isn't an obsession for the wild woman. It is a need to see represented this image of your own struggles through another person. So I think writing about such a character, a person, a participant, surely in my field that is that it's not interesting, it's a responsibility.
That was a great answer, Vila. Mama?
Bad girl, talking about a sad girl. Bad girl, talking about a sad girl.
She's a performer.
We were so young when we were a bunch of us at Transhuman prancing on stage with our skimpiest outfit. Little did I know that represent more or less bad girl, feral girl. Okay, that was so liberated. Okay, and in the course of my work in literature, I've been writing so many stories about wild and feral women. Even from Lady Chatterley's Lover right up to Salina by Samad Said, and recently work by Saras Manikam, My Mother Part 2, that I've already translated in Bahasa Malaysia. We are talking about feral and wild women and why they are so important, why they are so fascinating. Okay, because the readers seems to be from a group of people who are being locked with a certain social construct, and we are curious what is happening with this feral woman, what is happening with all of this so-called wild attitude and everything. We are curious, and I, out of my own realization, okay, since my debut novel up to my latest work, okay, I've already written about some feral women, wild women who go after their dreams in a very unconventional way. So I guess wild women, feral women, they are very important because they don't give a hoot of what's going on around them. Okay, they have a chaotic kind of life, and they are normally very interesting.
Thank you. We are, aren't we? Dina?
Hi, good evening, afternoon. You know, when I got your questions, right, the first thing I thought was, one, as you said just now, I felt there was a sense of deja vu. I think that Mama Regina and I have sat on a few panels talking about being women, I don't know, with broken glasses or whatever, you know, and I thought, oh, the same thing again, you know?
We're still discussing it in 2022.
Yeah, and honestly, I just started thinking like, okay, just like what Vila said, right? Okay, it is a responsibility for us to talk about women, you know, women under duress and all that, but how long more do we talk about this? Yes, there are a lot of stresses that we all go through. There's a lot of, when you look at our work is very stressful, yeah? I just wonder, like, is there something that we have to go on and on and on again? I'm not saying that the subject is dead, but I just want maybe a different form to it, but I could be wrong. So I'm just going to let you talk some more, and I'll just chip in when I can.
Right.
So, I mean, the last time Regina and I here, we were talking about menopause, HRT, which gynecologist. That was in 2019 before what? COVID, right? Yeah. And that was us, women under duress at the time. What was the title, huh?
I can't remember, but it's about HRT,
Yeah.
also and everything.
Yeah.
At
We're
this
training-
festival.
Same venue.
Same venue.
Okay.
For women. We just wanted to go, you know, that's it.
Okay, well that, I guess it's biology catching up with us and, you know, having to also contain all that involves being a woman. But coming back to what you said earlier, so, you know, in this day and age, it's 2022, we're heading into a new year, and we're still talking about women and, you know, I guess the unconvention, the unconvention of you know, being out of the norm, and hence the term wild woman. It's a patriarchal kind of idea, isn't it? I mean, the labels that make us so. What do you think, Chloe?
Yes, very much so. When I received this invitation, I was thinking about my own work, how has it played out, and I merely thought, well, this book where I wrote a lot about the suffragettes who in the 1910s in England campaigned for the right to vote and smash windows and paintings, and Emily Davison threw herself in front of the King's horse, and then they were in Holloway prison being force fed. But anyway, the media there pathologized them so much, and they were labeled hysterical, and when I was thinking of modern day examples, it'd be very much the climate activists, Extinction Rebellion in the UK, and really brave women who were. But the question was, how performative does it have to? How performative is it? And whether to be a wild woman you have to be performative, or can you also be a timid wild woman? You know, because that element, and even just being here with the three of you, thinking, I'm so shy, and how do I? How am I going to?
How do you beat that? You don't have
No,
to.
and I think
we're not in, you know,
my
we're not-
imagination, yes, but maybe not. I don't know as much as the three of you, or two of you. I don't know. But anyways, the question also I've been thinking right this moment is, you know, how performative, or we're not to say performative because that might undermine it, but you know, can one be timid and feral and wild. But again, it's also, very much for the male gaze.
It is the male gaze, isn't it? Vila.
So just to clarify, some people ask me whether I'm a writer. I'm a civil servant that works in a public university who's forced to write. So I'm not a writer. One of my most passionate writings are my grocery list and my WhatsApp messages to my husband to say, don't forget cat litter. So I guess that makes me a modern day writer. But for things that I have published are probably read by 5 people around the world, including the publishers, because academic books are perhaps the most boring thing that one can write, right? Yes, elitism, yes. And so recently, shameless plug, is that I published an academic book as an indigenous Sabahan woman writing about the Sabahan space. Here is where you clap. Yeah, thank you. I love giving directions. Yes, while women with clear directions, like ways, right? And I remember the entire book, and just to put all of you to sleep, was really a theoretical conversation about, some Foucauldian, Gidensian argument about space and power, and why irregular migrants are essentially a tool that is used by the sovereign body and so on and so forth, right? Incredibly theoretical argument. And what I decided was that the entire book had to be pieced together by stories. And that's essentially what an anthropologist does. They are a professional bullshitter. And I know this, I have a PhD in bullshitting. And I'm very proud of it because my mother doesn't really understand it, and that's fine. So, when the book was done, I was really thinking, that's it, Vila, you're going to win an award for sounding really smart, even though you don't understand half of the words you've written. And for some reason or other, there was only one chapter that everybody focused on. And it was focused on women whose husbands were deported and they were left behind. And in their time of waiting for years, they banded together, being given the name Tinggalan, which is a local term for those who are left behind, right? The Tinggalan women sat around, they got shit done, they took care of their children, they did the dishes, they became the man of the house. But the one thing that everybody harped on was that they sat around and they talked about sex, right? And for me, when I heard that, my biases also had to come into play. As writers, we go into a space or a topic and we think we're unbiased and we're going into uncharted territory, but of course you go in with biases, right? And I went in and I found that fascinating because I believed that these women, on some form or other, and upon writing it and for everybody else to read, they were not entitled to talking about their sex lives, And this was reviewed multiple times by people. Of course they talk about their sex lives, not just Carrie from Sex in the City, but them too. And I think this is the point that I'm trying to make. There's nothing extraordinary about somebody talking about an intimate experience. And somehow or other, in writing it, in saying that it is banal, it didn't become banal. It wasn't an everyday experience to the reader because there is a class, an elitist element to being wild. And I think that's something we certainly have to talk about.
Okay. That's a very brilliant point. I know, Mama, I really want to respond to that, especially in light of your writings.
You were asking whether it's patriarchal. Yes, it is patriarchal because if you remember here in Malaysia, way back then, mid-70s, we were introduced to so many tabloids, okay? And tabloids love to portray a feral and wild women as their core news, alright? And we waited weekly, day in, day out, we waited just to read about it. And in the long run, we have this tendency to becoming a little bit judgmental, just because our social construct is so different, okay? We were brought up with a certain ethics and values, and we started saying that this particular woman who is seeking for divorce is immoral, and somebody was caught during Kawat. The focus is only on the woman who's being considered as feral and wild, and we have stories on and on in tabloids. Okay, after all, it's tabloids. Okay, and we don't understand during that time. We were so young, we were so indulged in reading about wild and feral women, which is a very injustice, I should say. Yeah. When I grew up, okay, when I started writing about female and their stories, and of course I cannot avoid writing about sex workers, and you know, sometimes you just use your talent to write about perempuan bond, we call it. Okay, here in Bukit Mertajam, Penang, okay, whenever we see a different kind of woman who dare to dress up daringly, showing her cleavage and everything, we'll quickly label her as perempuan jahat, bad girl. All right, and then moving on, okay, we see a lot more incidents related to so-called wild and feral women, which is very, like I said, it's very injustice. Okay, it's not justice for us to keep labeling them as feral women just because they are different than us. Okay, then come a trans woman. Okay, for trans women like me, okay, we were labeled as deviant. Okay, deviant, and that's the whole reason for more than a decade I've been writing a lot about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, just to tame my cisgender readers that we exist and we can be useful. All right.
Thank you, Regina. Dina.
I'll just talk briefly about the responses to I Am Muslim and possibly the responses to the new book. When I read I Am Muslim in 2007, so for 1 year, 2 years, right, it wasn't just men who were after my heads, you know. Oh, yo, I had a lot of backlash from Malay women, and it came from a certain class. It was really, really interesting to me. You know, I got hell from the Mat Datins. And I remember telling one or two of them, you told me all this story, you told me to write about this, now I've written about it, why are you scolding me? And you know, it was very fascinating because it was like, well, we've told you this, and we know you want to write it, but seeing the truth on paper was very unsettling. And I'm sure people would know that it's about me, and so I've hidden you, your identity and all. And it was really fascinating because you're thinking, oh, you have all these issues, you wanted me to write about it, you confided in me. Okay, Malay men will be Malay men, so whatever lah, nak marah lah, you know, I've just come to that point, okay lah, I can't be bothered. But I was very surprised. I thought that, you know, but over the last few years, as I was writing this book during COVID, because I had nothing else to do, you know, to take a sabbatical for Iman, to be honest, needed a break and all that, and then I found a group of young women, and I just thought they were really fascinating, and I hope all of you actually tap on them. These are young Malay women who are book reviewers. They're always on Instagram. You know, there's one, I've met her a few times, Ruby Jusuf, who'll do all these books, you know, book reviews in a towel, you know, because she was hijab. And her friends will wear all kinds of uniforms, costumes, you know, crowns and all that. And as I got to know that, I just thought, oh, this is really fascinating. But they all told me this, oh, you know, Kak Dina, we're not this Mat Datin group. We're all, if not academics, we're just book lovers. We are from working class. But I found my conversations with them very refreshing because they're saying, we want more bad women. We want to show that we like seeing East Coast women, for example, right, doing the wrong things, because in real life, that is it. We see some of our mothers having affairs, some of our fathers having 2, 3, 4 wives, and they're all doing other things. It's good to see the truth on paper. And I just thought, this is really fascinating that you're talking about 2 different classes, or at least 2 different groups of women. If you are the Mat Datin T20, where there's a lot to protect, your face or whatever, you know, you don't want this. But for the rest of us, we want to see this because these are the truths of our lives. Yeah, patriarchy is involved, society, especially Malay society, and with, you know, with what's happened, even though we've got new Prime Minister now, I think you will see that, you know, he's got a lot of problems to deal with, you know. We'll talk about that another day.
Talking about his personal
not personal problems. I'm talking about the fact that, you know, before we jump back here, right? The fact is that PAS, the Islamist Party of Malaysia, they're strong. They've got a lot of support, right? So, but we can use that for another discussion, you know. So, yeah, it's not that great. So we'll see what happens with the new book.
All right, can't wait. Can't wait to read that. But is it titillation that appeals to readers, you know, when we refer to, I guess, a wild woman? Or is it the realness of her story? Chloe, what do you think? Why are we so fascinated with the character?
Well, again, I think it's the sense of, it just has a certain life force and sense of irrepressibility. And once there's that sort of character in a story or a myth, it's impossible to ignore, and they sort of throw everything off course. You know, the narrative of the stories doesn't continue in a straight line anymore. Again, I think of the suffragettes, they're like comets, with long-tailed comets, and they were often considered sort of tears in the social fabric. And so, again, in the story, but it was also a certain immediacy and authenticity and sense of primal, and also often revealing the hypocrisy within the social mores of the other characters. Depending on the context.
I personally, you know, when I read about wild women, I'm titillated, and that is the whole point, is to get something out of it, right? When you're reading, and the character is, you know, doing something, being something more than what she's, I guess, expected to do. Doesn't that? I mean, how does one then consume her?
I mean, yes. Yes, thank you. You know, I think society really is about structures. It's about forms, and it's about worshipping those structures, right? If you're thinking about, and when I say structures, I don't mean physical pillars. I mean, you know, your points of authority are structures, and society is abiding by those need to conform to those points of authority is another structure, right? Your religious bodies are structures. The family unit has a structure, and everybody is expected to follow that structure because it's about power and obedience, right? And I think that's what it is. And when somebody says, I will not obey, you're saying that these structures don't make sense. And I think that's the issue, though. It's not that the structures don't make sense. They don't have to make sense in only one particular way. Why should they? Whose truth are we abiding to when we say, yes, this is how things are done? You know, you put one leg into one pant at a single time. So if I want to jump both legs at the same time, do both the pants wrong, is it? If it works for me, it works for me, right? But the point is that somehow or other, the disruption means that you're telling whoever's on top of that hierarchical structure that your orders don't matter. And not that it just doesn't matter, it doesn't matter to me all the time in the way you want it to. And I think this disrupts everything. And certainly if we're using this ideology of intersectionality, it's not just the woman. We have to pay attention to women who are of a different class, a different caste, who are ableist, different gender and sexual orientations. I could be speaking from a total position of privilege while I'm a woman, and yet another person who is identifying and is a woman in this world who could be disabled, you know, coming from a completely different class structure, color structure, you know, fat and disabled, trans even, is considered the bottom of the muck from where I come from. So even though we're all sort of sitting down here together talking about women's issues, I think context, specific context, is in itself the activism that I would like to invite everybody to participate in, whether you are a reader or a writer. Because I think this is where the sort of bad girl image comes in, when you disrupt. But it's not because women were designed to just break structures, it's because we're right at the bottom of it. So at some point, that structure's gonna crack, because everybody in the bottom is just going to say, "The children lah, I cannot say lah." But you know what I mean, you know what I mean.
Yes, we do. Did you want to respond to that, Roma?
Well, naturally, all of us were being tied with a certain moral values, regardless what is our race, religion, or whatever it is, all right? And when it comes to feral women, when they go against the moral value, okay, people are very curious to know what's going on with them, okay? They are very curious to know what's going on with them. At the same time, they wanted to judge this particular person, okay, the feral woman, okay, let alone sex workers, because I've been talking about sex workers a lot, because in some of my literature work, I met the real one, and I just twist everything, okay, into fiction, okay. There is one term here in Penang that is what we call bar korek. Bar korek is a very weird term that we are curious to know. Are you curious to know what's bar korek?
Yes.
Bar korek is a place where a female who's very desperate, okay, not very pretty, to become a hot sex worker, just maybe at the age of 40 something and above, okay, they will be going to a very dingy bar, okay, located at a few places here, and the situation is very dark. All they need to do is just sit down with some customers. The customer can be an old apek, whatever it is, okay. No sex are required, okay, but they have to let all of these apek do a little bit of correct, you know, in the dark, yeah. So these are the things. I met some of these bar correct girls, and I really asked them, you know, and it is very sad indeed, yeah, very sad. So sometimes we try very hard to judge people, okay. We try very hard to judge people. I'm not talking in the context of ordinary people judging trans women like me. That is so yesterday, right? Even among cisgender and cisgender, they keep judging among themselves, okay? Okay, saying that that particular neighbor, the daughter is useless, right? And that particular daughter, oh, she got pregnant at 16, blah, blah, blah. So we don't know what's the real situation here. How do we come to an understanding that everybody has their very own history, and we have our very own path to go through, and you know, or maybe it will just keep going on because we as human, we need a little bit of drama in our life. Okay, let it even be a repeated storyline. All right. Okay, so more or less, a feral and wild woman will always attract, let's say, readers who are reading them in literature work, even during our real living, okay, where we want some sensational story.
Yeah, it boils down to that, doesn't it? Sensationalism. I mean, do you feel that in this day and age, the terms wild and feral when discussing women is still kind of relevant? I mean, is there maybe a more modern, woke description, depiction, or term?
The modern one is all the housewife series that you are watching on television.
Yeah, I don't know about that for you. But certainly sometimes, like when I talk to my friends who are writers and all, yeah, I don't know whether it's COVID that's made us like this, but you get really tired having to hold the weight of, well, not the world, but at least one or two things on your shoulders. And you think, you know, as Vila said, are we that privileged to be that responsible or hold that? I mean, who are we? At the end of the day, okay, we kind of know how to string a few words into a sentence. Okay lah, put here, put there, and then, you know, put some bunga-bunga, and it becomes a story or an article, right? But I think I'd like to think at least, the women on this panel, we're just doing our work. I don't know about being wild or what. I think I'm pretty boring. Are you boring? I don't know, but I think it's just that, anyway, we're just doing this work. If people are going to perceive us as that, well, what can you do? And if our readers actually find some salvation in the work that we do and see something that which we don't, right? Then, okay, if it helps you, great. If it makes you angry, at least there's a discussion. If you want to kill us, okay, what can we do? But I don't know, I mean, do the other writers feel this way?
Would you like to respond to that, Chloe?
Well, sort of tangentially. I just wanted to, I'm just thinking now also how Mexico is a very paradoxical society. On the one hand, every man is obsessed with his mother, and the most famous woman in our culture is the Virgin of Guadalupe. And yet we have one of the highest rates of feminicides in the world, over 10 women murdered a day. Especially in very sinister border towns, but also even in Mexico City, and the violence is encroaching everywhere. And so there have been really incredible protests with tens of thousands of women marching in Mexico City, and all our different cities wearing purple and being very outspoken and condemning, because there's also the sense that these young women, many of the ones who were murdered, somehow asked for it by walking home alone at night, going out until 5 in the morning, or wearing a miniskirt, or just feeling free. Exhibiting some sort of, well, they're considered boldness, where elsewhere in Europe, when I returned to London, where I live, I realized how fortunate I am that I don't have those fears. But again, the whole sense of just how you inhabit the world, and how in one society you are considered wild, where in the others, in London, girls coming home at 4 in the morning in miniskirts, you're not asking for to be raped or murdered.
You know, as we're having this whole conversation, I noticed that this category of wild and feral is a huge category. You know, it's huge. You could be wild for surviving and being a sex worker. You could be wild for being a divorcee. You're wild if you suddenly, you know, there's even a point in the category where you could be wild for deciding to deliberately skip church one day, right? You know, the gray area is so large. It's so huge, and that's unfair. It's unfair how easily you can fall into that category and expect that category to be a bad category. It's the perfect category, you know? It's the greatest category, you know? Reclaim that shit. But I'm going to sort of jump off from what Dina just said. And so, while she was speaking, I was really reminded of this story about pubic hair. And stay with me. Stay with me. Do not deviate. You know, in the early 90s, when I first got my hands on women's magazines and how to be pretty, and this is important, because throughout the 90s into the 2000s, you could only be pretty if you were the complete opposite of me. If you were not fat, or you were not brown, and your hair was straight, and you know, you could wear jeans that were just literally hanging off your crotch. I have 4, right? And the most wonderful, wonderful invention that they thought that they came up with was no pubic hair, right? This whole notion of completely stripping your crotch of the one most important thing that you should keep. And for years, all bodies are different. But my body did not react well to the very first try. It was the worst, right? And yet here I was trying to emulate, figuring out how I could fit into this box. Because I was tired of being an outlier. I was tired of saying, why can't I be, you know, subscribe to this image of an international standard of beauty, whatever the hell that means. And finally one day, it takes you having Google being invented, where they tell you why pubic hair is probably the best for those who are bush havers and bush lovers, right? That it is not wild. That was the term. having your pubic hair was wild. And in many ways, the wild female writer and the wild female character is pubic hair in the 90s. And why should it be that? Why? It's absolutely natural. It's supposed to be that. Disruption is an everyday practice of life, not order. And so I think the sooner we get to understand that. Now, if you're not a bush haver or bush lover, that's fine too. We're not here to villainize you. But the idea is that if all bodies are great and all functions are good and we are supposed to be compassionate and understanding, and as our latest Prime Minister has said, formidable and inclusive, then therefore I think the operation here is in recognizing all female characters are there because they are necessary. They disrupt because it is important. And on top of that, please love your pubic hair.
Indeed. I've got to go cancel my waxing appointment.
Let's just jump in before.
Yes.
We've been talking about wild women and all that, but we're talking about a group of people here who are, I suppose, as wild as we, right? But for me, with the work that we do, the things, what scares me is that the rise of wild women in conservatism in Malaysia. And these women are very, very powerful, I'm talking about the Ismas, I'm talking about all their subcategory of Wafi, you name it, the groups, right? And these women, they work within a certain Islamic framework. It's Islamist, but it's not the normal kind of Islamist framework. And I've seen them in action, webinars, you think, wow, there's a lot of fire there, but they're also speaking a very dangerous language where all of us will probably be burned at stake or masuk jail lah. And the thing is, a lot of people when they look at all these far-right groups, it's always the men, but the most dangerous ones are the women. They're very silent, except for one or two who's very, very vocal, right? And you go, wow, how do you actually negotiate and talk? But this, I don't know whether these kind of women would actually enter these kind of realms. They probably are not interested. They'll probably go to a different kind of, literary book fairs, but not us. So we're protected for now. There's an international group here, expatriates, people who read. But the rest of Malaysia is not that. And when I talk to these young girls, these book reviewers, they say, hey, how can you read all these things? Nanti kan blah, 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 and all that. And to them, they see book reading and reading this book as a sign of resistance. But again, there are very few. And they're all on Instagram. I follow them on live, hearing them do this, but there's just too few of them. And I sometimes think like, my God, what happens if these girls are found out by the deans of the universities, because some of them are doing their PhDs or masters, and they're talking about feminism, they're talking about sex, yes, they're talking about, private parts and all that. Now, for now, Instagram is safe haven, right? But you've got to be very careful with the far-right groups, because they're very social media savvy. So we're not just talking about wild women here, but we've got another, the counter, the ones who may counter us in the future. So I just like to say that before I forget.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, actually. And actually, when you think about it, right, women who are independent in their thoughts and their actions and unwilling to behave or conform, that's just the modern woman in general, isn't it? Can we discuss that? I mean, why is this now continuing to be something I suppose we are intrigued by in literature, if it's just the norm? Who wants to take this?
I don't know if I want to answer your question entirely, but the artist that I've worked on a lot, Lenore Carrington, who's one of the great surrealists, not just female surrealists, but surrealist artists. She wrote an essay in 1970 called Female, Human, Animal, when the second wave of feminism was sweeping the West. And in this essay, it was very much pushing against the patriarchal hierarchy, but also any sort of labeling and taxonomy, just like female, human, animal, and beyond that, don't expect anything more of me. And in her short stories in particular, her paintings are full of hybrid animals, and like many emigres, she sort of embodied this kind of hybridity. She was English, but then lived in France and then spent over 6 decades in Mexico. But in her short stories in particular, man is the agent of destruction wherever he appears, and the only redemptive or redeeming humans are those of the feral qualities, and mostly women. And they're the ones who are the only humans who are free in her short stories, free of convention and social mores, expectations. And in one of her most famous short stories called The Debutante's Ball, a young girl who's meant to go to be dressed up to meet the king. The hyena comes to visit her, and she puts the hyena's face. She puts the hyena in her dress, and the hyena goes off, eats her, and goes off to the ball. But anyway, it's again that slippage between the animal world and the human, but also very important. The feral for her, she equates very much with freedom, and I think that's and that's something that the freer one is, the more danger one seems to have being labeled as feral or wild.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just a label that we make because the one that we see right in front of us is not as conventional as we are, all right? And like the old saying say, well, good women go to heaven, bad women, she goes everywhere.
Coming back to the Georgetown Literary Festival and our theme for this year, Taming the Wild, do you think the wild woman, so to speak, needs to be tamed?
No. Why? For who? Why? Why can't the wild woman hang out with the wild man? Why can't everybody be wild that when you are unwild, then you become the new wild? I don't know. I mean, these things are cyclical, right? I certainly, if somebody ever came up to me and said, Vila, you're crazy, which has happened most of my life, I'm quite comfortable in that space, because if being crazy is this, it's been fun. It's not been easy, but it certainly is a life well lived. And I'm sure for many people who've had ups and downs, or they've also participated in such a thing, they'll know that I think at the end of the toothpaste tube that you get squeezed out of, I'm not a very religious person clearly, is that it comes out in a way where you probably had some control over things. You probably had a say. And I think that's the biggest fear for women who are deemed, or characters who are deemed wild. They finally had a say. And I think we all want to hear what that say is. Because the worst thing you could do to a character is just never do her justice. Never ever do her justice. And she could have said a lot of things, but whether it was sincere and whether it came from the heart is, I think, what's most important. So, I think the best women are the ones that just said, fuck you, motherfucker.
Yeah. I apologize to those who brought their children today. I did warn you, though, at the very beginning. We do have another 10 more minutes. I thought that we would take some questions. But before we do that, do any of you have anything you want to add about, whether the wild woman needs to be tamed?
Well, they don't need to be tamed because we don't have any measurement instrument, how feral they are, how wild they are. It's just because they are just different from us, okay? And for those of you who wanted to confess that you are wild, it's up to you. And for those of you who think that they are more or less like a feral cat, it's up to you, yeah? But in my case, I would just love to say that I've been there and done that, and it's lovely.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to open the floor. Edin, you have a question? Can we get a mic? Edin Koo, everyone.
Thank you. Hi, Dina. Vila, being the son and brother of your teachers, I think it would weigh heavily on them that you trivialize the work you do in the way that you do. Okay, my question is something that we've spoken about and Dina's a bit weary that we spoke about the same thing 4 years ago, but she may be even more weary that we've spoken about this for 20 years. Essentially, it's about interrogation and language. And I don't want to use the word reclaim. I mean, the realities are harrowing and have been explained why they're harrowing. But the language to interrogate and grapple with these things is also very limited. I don't want to wade into the politics of wokeism, but for as long as we're using the language of Western academia and Western activism, you're never going to win. We come from a tradition that is completely wild and feral. It still exists. It is not about what you wear, but about the spirit you carry. We live essentially in a tradition that was largely matriarchal and somehow got turned in its... So there are lots of paradoxes to wade through. What I'm asking is, this region never had a problem with transgenderism. If you look at Apsaras, if you look Orang Langit, Orang Kayangan, they are all the place where the two worlds meet and were somehow at one time deified. But none of that language informs how we talk about the problem today. So in this particular festival, certain dimensions have been focused on. The colonization of our knowledge, the structures that are created, very subtle, very nuanced in the way that, not indigenous or native, I don't know what to call it really, but those, that language, that kind of knowledge is just simply not coming through to inform our discourse about what are essentially very contemporary, highly politicized problems.
Thank you, Edin.
Can I just say something to you, Edin? Thank you very much, Edin. Terima kasih banyak-banyak. I agree with you. I think language fails us entirely. And I would like to use a little example from the work that I've done. For one of the Tinggalan women, I think especially if you come from a community that's, oppressed by a government, and your husband is taken away, your community at large is incredibly judgmental of the sole female. A single woman navigating the world is probably an eyesore in many communities. And so one of the things one of the women said to me in Malay is, "Saya bukan sundal. Saya bukan sundal kerana kau ambil laki saya," which means, translated into English, became a huge problem with my publishers. I'm not a whore just because you took my husband away. And the truth was, that was the best translation that I could find for the term. And yet the entire term was so loaded, it was so layered, it was incredibly visceral. And for somehow or other, because we're all in the business of wanting to publish for an English reading audience, was that I had to find a way to translate it, and still came across offensive to the reader, I think, right? And this is a very good example when language fails us, because we do come from communities, non-Western, non-colonial communities and societies that are able to depict one word carries so many meanings in many different ways, sometimes not mentioned or not articulated in its entire form, but able to translate an entire emotion. And I think this is where there is a massive limitation. There is a massive, and I, as a person who writes in English, and also as a civil servant who's forced to write in Bahasa Malaysia, is that I'm stuck. I feel sometimes that I am stuck in doing justice to these words used by a woman only in the way a woman can. So I agree with you. I think that's certainly something to unpack next year in GTLF. I mean, by then I'll be a jet-setting professor, and I won't have time for this place, but I will send a representative. Thank you.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, Karthini.
Thank you so much for that really wonderful panel full of, I think, profound insights. I was wondering if I could invite you each to share a piece of art, whether a book or a film or a painting, that has, I think, brought you joy in your capacity as a woman, wild or otherwise.
Yeah. Dina,
Recommendation for the rest of us.
piece of work or art brings you joy, wild or not. There, I summarized it.
I have no idea. There are too many things that fascinate me. Yeah.
Can I just use a writer then? Why did you got me into writing? Who got me into writing was much younger, and I was really, really impressed by Marguerite Duras, the French writer. You know, everybody was reading The Lover because, she was having this affair with this married Chinese man, but I just fell in love with the whole thing because I thought it was very lyrical. So, does that answer? Okay.
Well, in my case, it's Catherine Lim, a very respectable professor from RELC, Singapore. I think she influenced most of my storytelling. She has written about a feral and wild movement a long time ago, and she managed to write about them beautifully. Okay, it's just that now I'm writing everything in Bahasa Malaysia.
Arundhati Roy.
Oh,
Yeah, Arundhati Roy, The God of Small Things. That would probably be my first introduction to the depiction of a non-white woman who was just there to say, I don't care. I think that was very powerful for me at that time. For the words I could understand. The other times I was chasing boys.
Chloe?
Probably Maria Sabina, who was a Mexican mushroom priestess from Oaxaca.
A mushroom priestess.
Yes, who in the 60s and 70s, many writers and musicians would come and take mushroom trips with her, and unfortunately, the community then ostracized her because she brought too much foreign attention. But she's someone who never learned to read or write, but she was an oral poet, one of the greatest poets of Mexico, and lived in tremendous, tremendous poverty and died in poverty. But anyway, she was an extraordinary poet and lived in the wilderness, far from any city and more conventional society.
Wonderful. All right, one more question, one last question.
Thank you so much. My name is June, and I just want to say congratulations and thank you for curating Shazmin and Paul in this panel. And it resonated with a talk that I heard from Hannah Kent. Hannah Kent is an Australian writer, and she writes about outsiders. So it's about women who are being cast aside from society, who have been rejected by the majority, not out of their free will. That the majority then decides, these women do not belong, in our group. And these actions actually reflect more the values and the ethical decisions of the society, not so much a reflection of the women themselves, but rather of society. And I was struck because Dina kept bringing up as well the increasing conservatism that we see right now in Malaysia. And I thought it's interesting. I'm not a Malay woman like Vila. We are both, Native women from Sabah and Sarawak. And but I always thought Malay women, you occupy a space there's also a lot of privilege, but also a lot of oppression. Like you're constantly being watched. That then non-Malay women are often. And like what Dina was saying, and what do you think about, like, for example, the shrinking of space where women who are previously not seen as outsiders are now more likely to be seen as outsiders because they're not bound by the ethical decisions and the values that are being held perhaps by a conservative majority, but also what it means to people like, for example, like Regina and Vila, who had less protection. What does that mean? And just sort of reflect on the shrinking of space where women are previously protected and are now seen as more wild or more outsiders. Thank you.
Am I supposed to respond to this?
Yeah.
That doesn't
Go
mean
on,
I have to
Dina.
answer, right?
Yeah.
I think June has actually summarizes
Yes.
everything. You know, it's true. I mean, sometimes I get tired being a Malay woman, you know. Because everyone's like, oh, you're Malay, you get all the discounts, da 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 da. It is only for a certain elite. But it is true. The space is shrinking. You get my young nieces going, why this, why that, you know? And it doesn't mean that I have friends who wear the hijab also who are saying, why are things so bad? You know, especially before we got this new prime minister, everyone was worried that PN would win, yeah? But again, also, they come from a certain class, so there's another thing together to unpack. But yeah, it's not easy to be a Malay Muslim in Malaysia, but
If you say that, you're considered like, what the heck, correct?
I just don't think about it. I just do my thing. I think for any Malaysian who's living here, and we all have friends, right, who talk about this in the privacy of our homes, you know, like, why this, why that, why this, why that. I think the only way you can do this, okay, one, manage, not expectations, but manage your stress. But two, I guess you've got to fight back through books, through, through writing, through arts, I don't know. I'll just give you one little example before we end this. I just came back from a conference and I met a donor. And I've got this brilliant idea. And I said, why don't we use books from wherever in Southeast Asia? And we do little road tours around, you know, Kulai, Kulim, little places like this. And he just flew over, he said, so do you want to hold a literary festival? No! We can do this on Instagram. And that was when I realized that not a lot of people really care for things, for this so-called bright ideas. But I guess for all of us in this room, this is the thing that we have to do lah. We'll just have to keep on going, you know? I mean,
Well, yeah, we'll continue this discussion next year, so you have a whole year to think about solutions. Well, anyway, I've been given the Time's Up signboard a while back ago, so I would like to thank all of you for listening rapturously to our panel today. Dina, Regina, Vila, and so thank you so much. And may we all be wild and free. Thank you.